What do you mean, I'm not part of the bakery anymore? Those words hit me harder than the late April wind blowing through the open back door of Marlowe's Hearth and Crumb, our family bakery in Rockridge, Vermont. It smelled like cinnamon, proofed dough, and betrayal. I just pulled a tray of honey lavender scones from the oven. My recipe, by the way, when my younger brother Sawyer cornered me by the walk-in freezer, a manila envelope in hand and a lawyer's draft in his voice. "Ivy," he said, barely making eye contact. "Mom and I had a long conversation. It's time the bakery moves in a different direction." I stood there, my apron dusted with flour and sweat, staring at him like he'd just declared the sky was green. "A different direction?" I echoed, voice cracking. "I built that direction." His expression didn't waver. Cool. Businesslike. I used to call it his corporate mask back when he worked in Boston and only came home for Thanksgiving. "You're too rooted in the past. You're not scalable," he added, like I was a faulty piece of software. The words echoed around the industrial kitchen that had been my second home for over 30 years. The place where I learned to braid challah dough at 12, burned my first pecan pie at 16, and baked 200 wedding cupcakes the day after my divorce. My mom, our mom, Evelyn, hadn't even come down to tell me herself. Sawyer handed me the papers and walked off like he'd just taken out the trash. I watched him go, feeling like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Overhead, the ventilation fan hummed. I could still hear the timer beeping from the front ovens. That's the moment I knew. They didn't just push me out of a business. They tried to erase me from my own legacy. I'm Ivy Marlowe, and I'm 52 years old. I didn't expect to be starting over, not at this age, and definitely not in the very town I helped put on the regional food map. Rockridge isn't big. It's one of those postcard towns in Vermont with white steepled churches, farmers markets on Saturdays, and autumn leaves that bring Instagram tourists in droves. Everyone knows everyone. And everyone knew Marlowe's Hearth and Crumb. My grandparents opened the bakery in 1949. It started in the back of their farmhouse. My grandfather delivered loaves door to door from his old Studebaker. By the time I was born, the Hearth and Crumb was a mainstay on Sycamore Street, with its signature green awning and that iconic cast-iron sign that still hangs crooked over the front window. I grew up behind the counter, standing on milk crates to reach the register, licking mixing spoons, and falling asleep on flour sacks during early morning preps. While other kids watched Saturday morning cartoons, I was rolling out pastry dough with my mom under the soft hum of jazz from the kitchen radio. I didn't just learn how to bake. I learned rhythm, temperature, timing, how a crust should sound when it breaks under a knife, how the bakery smelled 5 minutes before the cinnamon rolls were ready. When I turned 17, I took over the early shifts, by choice. While Sawyer slept in or holed up in his room playing video games, I was kneading dough in the dark, watching the sunrise through the fogged-up windows of the proofing room. I was proud of that life. Still am. I never left Rockridge for long. I went to culinary school in New Hampshire, interned at a farm-to-table place in Burlington, but always knew I'd come back. The bakery was my inheritance, not just of blood, but of purpose. Sawyer was different. He left right after college, took a job in corporate marketing, and only returned when our dad had a stroke in 2019. That was the first time I'd seen him in nearly 5 years. He came back wearing Italian shoes and talking about brand equity and market reach, like we were a cereal company, not a neighborhood bakery. I thought he was here to help. I had no idea he was here to take over. Looking back, the signs were all there. Sawyer had been home less than 6 months before he started talking about streamlining operations. That meant firing Glenna, our 63-year-old delivery driver who'd been with us since I was in high school. Her only crime? Not understanding the new app he wanted to use for deliveries. Then came the pilot menu test, which was really just him scrapping half our offerings. No more peach hand pies. No more rosemary shortbread. He said they weren't trending. Trending. We weren't TikTok. We were the place people came when their grandmother died or their kid got into college. Our bakes were memory, not marketing. I tried to reason with him. Sawyer, this isn't a brand, I told him during one of our weekly meetings. It's a community. He smirked. He always smirked when he thought I was being too sentimental. Exactly, Ivy, he said. And communities evolve. You can either adapt or get buried in flour. He wanted to rename the bakery Crumb. Just Crumb. Said it sounded more modern. Wanted to repaint the front in black and white and remove the hanging sign. I refused. That sign had hung there for 70 years, rain or shine. Our regulars would have noticed. They would have felt it. But the biggest slap came a week before he handed me the termination letter. Mom started canceling our weekly bake planning sessions. Suddenly, she was too tired or had errands. She stopped replying to my messages about holiday specials and seasonal orders. I'd find her huddled with Sawyer in the office, door half closed, whispering over spreadsheets and logistics reports. She'd never been tech-savvy. She didn't even have a password on her phone. But Sawyer dazzled her with sales charts and projections and words like expansion strategy. I watched her nod and smile while he pitched frozen product lines and wholesale distribution. He's just helping us catch up, she told me once, brushing flour from my cheek like I was a child again. You focus on what you love, I'll let Sawyer handle the rest. And I believed her. Until the day he handed me that envelope, told me I was no longer a good fit, and gave me 3 weeks of severance, from the business I'd run every morning since I was 17. I didn't cry. Not then. I finished the scones. I wiped the counters. I left the tray on the prep table like I did every Thursday morning. And then I walked out the back door for what I thought was the last time. The thing about small towns is, when something breaks, everyone hears the crack. By Monday, half of Rockridge knew I'd been pushed out. Some people texted condolences, others offered gossip disguised as concern. I ignored most of it. I spent the first few days holed up in my kitchen at home, baking compulsively. Brown butter blondies, maple rye biscuits, old family recipes I hadn't touched in years. Baking had always been how I coped. But this time, it wasn't enough. By Thursday, I found myself driving aimlessly through town, windows down, one hand on the wheel, the other fidgeting with my grandmother's old silver ring. That's when I saw it. The For Lease sign in the window of the old floral shop on Willow Street. It stopped me cold. I hadn't even realized I'd parked until the engine clicked off and silence settled in. The storefront wasn't anything fancy. Cracked stone steps, faded green trim, a few broken planters on the curb. But the windows faced east, which meant morning light would pour in, and the space was long enough for an open kitchen. I sat there in my car, engine cooling, heart pounding, and this wild idea started to bloom in my mind. What if I didn't just walk away? What if I opened something new? Not to compete. Not out of spite. But for me. Something smaller. Warmer. A place that felt like me, not like a hollowed-out version of the family legacy. That night, I barely slept. My hands itched, not to punch a wall, but to build again. To create. I pulled out a spiral notebook and started sketching what the space could look like. I thought about a name. Something simple, something that carried weight but wasn't burdened by the past. I settled on it just after midnight. Kindred. Not just about family by blood, but family by choice. The kind you build. The kind you feed. By morning, I was calling the leasing agent. The landlord, a woman named Dana with a love of scones and no patience for bureaucracy, agreed to meet me that afternoon. You want it? She asked, pushing the creaky door open and gesturing toward the empty space. I stepped inside. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The building lease for the shop on Willow Street was finalized in 9 days. 9 days between heartbreak and blueprint. 9 days between betrayal and a blank canvas. It felt fast, but when you've had your identity ripped out of you, momentum becomes survival. The space was a mess. The old plumbing grumbled. The walls were yellowed from decades of sun and neglect. But where others saw decay, I saw potential. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. The The first thing I did was paint the walls a warm, soft oat color, something that felt like sunlight in January. Then I tore out the linoleum and exposed the original maple floors beneath. Scratched. Imperfect. But real. Honest. Like me. The kitchen took the most effort, and most of my savings. I cashed out an old IRA, dipped into what little was left in the emergency fund, and maxed out a credit card or two. I told myself it was a risk worth taking. I wasn't just investing in ovens and mixers. I was investing in myself. I called on people who knew me before I was the sister who got cut. Glenna, the delivery driver Sawyer fired, showed up with her brother-in-law's van and helped me haul in used equipment from a restaurant auction in Montpelier. Marcy, who'd worked with me at Hearth and Crumb for 18 years, showed up on a Sunday with a tool belt and a box of antique pastry tins. "You building something or proving a point?" she joked. "Hopefully both," I said. We laughed, but there was truth in it. I wasn't trying to crush my family's bakery. I was just trying to reclaim the part of myself they'd erased. And maybe, just maybe, bake something even better from the crumbs. Naming the shop Kindred turned out to be prophetic. The word started attracting people like magnets, people who had been discarded, underestimated, or just looking for something real. Local farmers who wanted to collaborate. A single mom who'd left her sous chef job in Boston. Even a retired teacher named Neil who offered to build custom shelves in exchange for weekly gingerbread. And I let them in. Not just to help, but to belong. Kindred opened its doors 6 months after that awful day in the walk-in freezer. No ribbon cutting, no press releases. Just a handwritten sign in the window, fresh bread. Fresh start. By 6:45 a.m. on opening day, there was a line around the corner. 2 weeks after Kindred opened, I walked past Hearth and Crumb on my way to the farmer's market. I didn't plan to stop, I rarely did, but something about the silence struck me. No smell of cinnamon. No laughter from regulars in the front corner booth. Just an empty patio and that brand new minimalist logo Sawyer had paid a marketing firm $12,000 to design. It said Crumb now. Just Crumb. No hearth. No warmth. Inside, the lights were on but the soul was gone. I heard from neighbors that business had dropped. The almond croissants tasted like cardboard, and Sawyer had replaced Mom's braided cherry loaf with some sterile-looking protein muffin. "It's clean eating now," a teen behind the counter had said when someone asked what happened to the sour cream coffee cake. The regulars? They came to Kindred. Quietly, at first. I'd see them peek through the window, unsure if they were allowed to cross some invisible family loyalty line. I always smiled and waved them in. Lorna Holloway, who used to order 6 loaves a week from me at the old bakery, showed up one morning and wrapped me in a tearful hug. "It just doesn't taste right anymore over there," she said. "It's hollow. Yours still feels like home." That word, home. It hit deeper than she knew. Mom didn't come by. Not once. But I'd see her around town, at the co-op, at church, occasionally outside the bank. She'd give me this tight, uncertain smile. Like she wasn't sure if she was proud or ashamed. Sawyer, on the other hand, started unraveling. He laid off 3 of the bakers by month 3. Said they were redundant. He cut store hours, then launched a frozen cookie line that flopped so hard it made the local business newsletter. The bakery that once filled Rockridge with warmth was now a husk with Bluetooth speakers and bad lighting. You could see it dying. And yet, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt grief. They weren't just losing a bakery. They were losing the memory of everything that had once made it matter. It started with a food blogger from Montpelier. She came in on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, ordered a plum tart and a nettle scone, then sat in the corner with a thick novel and her raincoat still dripping. We exchanged maybe 10 words. 2 days later, Kindred was all over her Instagram. "This isn't just a bakery. It's an experience. You don't just taste Ivy's pastries, you feel them." That line got reposted a dozen times. Then the New England Bites newsletter picked it up. Then Vermont Table magazine. And then, 3 weeks later, I got an email from the Vermont Artisan Food Awards. Kindred had been nominated for Best New Independent Bakery in the Northeast. I stared at the screen for almost a full minute, afraid to breathe. It wasn't just about the award. It was the fact that someone somewhere had noticed what I was doing, and cared enough to tell others. The story ran alongside a piece about the decline of legacy bakeries struggling to adapt, and though they never mentioned Crumb by name, the subtext was loud enough for Rockridge to hear. One Saturday in October, I walked into Kindred at 6:30 a.m. and found the front windows steamed up with a line already forming outside. People were holding coffee in gloved hands, chatting, pointing at the new seasonal menu I'd written in chalk the night before. Inside, the team moved like a symphony. Marcy glazing sticky buns. Neil restocking the bread rack with loaves still warm from the oven. I stepped behind the counter, tied on my apron, and someone in line said, "There she is. Not the owner. Not Ivy Marlowe. Just, there she is." Like the return of a favorite song. And it struck me. This was my recognition. Not a trophy. Not a write-up. Not a nod from my mother. But this. The murmur of happy customers. The golden crackle of crust. The space breathing with energy I helped create. And then, the invitation came. I was asked to speak at the Vermont Women in Food Summit. A keynote on resilience, creativity, and starting over after loss. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. I printed out my talking points on cardstock. I stood in a ballroom filled with chefs, bakers, winemakers, and farmers, and I told them the truth. Sometimes you don't get the title you earned. Sometimes the people who should believe in you don't. And sometimes you build anyway, not in spite of them, but for yourself. When I stepped off the stage, people stood, not because I was famous, but because they understood. It was mid-November when they showed up. I had just finished arranging pine boughs and dried oranges in the front window for the winter display when I saw them standing outside. Mom and Sawyer. No appointment. No warning. They looked smaller. Sawyer's coat was wrinkled, his eyes sunken. Mom clutched her purse like it was a shield. For a second, I thought about not unlocking the door. But I did. Out of habit. Out of grace. I'm not sure which. They stepped in, and the smell of cardamom and brown sugar wrapped around us like a blanket. Sawyer looked at the pastry case but didn't say a word. "Can we sit?" Mom asked softly, her voice more fragile than I remembered. I led them to the corner booth by the window, the same spot my dad used to drink his coffee every Saturday morning before his stroke. No one ever sat there now. I'd left it open. Out of memory. Out of respect. I brought them tea. No pastries. I waited. Finally, Mom spoke. "The bakery's in trouble," she said, folding her napkin over and over in her lap. We took out a loan. Things didn't go how we planned." Sawyer didn't meet my eyes. I noticed his fingers twitching, a childhood tic he only did when he was overwhelmed. My stomach tightened, but I said nothing. "We thought," she continued, "maybe you could come back. Just for a while. Help us turn things around." I let the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I spoke, clear, even direct. "No." Mom's eyes widened. She wasn't used to that word from me. "I offered to help before. You chose Sawyer. You didn't just let me go, Mom. You erased me." Sawyer shifted in his seat. "I made mistakes," he muttered. I turned to him. "You didn't just make mistakes. You pushed me out of my own history. You told me I wasn't a good fit for something I bled into for 30 years. They both looked at the table. I took a slow sip of my tea. "I'm not coming back. I won't rescue you. But," I paused, "I can recommend a business consultant. I can share some of my vendor contacts. That's it." Mom looked like she might cry. Sawyer didn't speak again. When they left, they did so quietly. No hugs. No apologies. Just the sound of the bell on the front door jingling as they slipped out into the cold. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt free. 3 weeks later, the first snow of the season dusted Rockridge like powdered sugar. I arrived at Kindred just before dawn, the sky still a deep velvet blue, and stood outside for a moment to take it in, my little shop glowing warm against the cold. Inside, the team was already humming. Marcy was humming along to Nina Simone while shaping cinnamon knots. Neil had made a batch of cranberry rye a full hour ahead of schedule. The espresso machine hissed like it knew what kind of day it was going to be. I stood in the center of it all, hands on hips, apron tied, cheeks flushed from the cold, and finally let myself feel it. I had done it. Not to prove them wrong. Not to win back love. But because I deserved something that was mine. My worth didn't come from a title, or a sign above a door, or even from my family's belated acknowledgement. It came from every morning I opened the shop when I didn't want to. From every person who took a bite of something I created and smiled without knowing why. It came from choosing myself, over guilt, over obligation, over the old stories I'd been handed and told to live inside. Sometimes I still pass by Hearth and Crumb. Or Crumb, I should say. I hear they brought in a consultant from Albany, tried to revive some of the original recipes, though Sawyer renamed the cherry loaf something ridiculous like Heritage Twist. But I don't feel anger anymore. Or loss. I feel distance. And peace. Because I didn't just walk away. I walked forward. At the Vermont Artisan Food Awards that winter, Kindred won Best New Independent Bakery. I gave a quiet, heartfelt speech, and as I stepped down from the stage, someone from the audience, an older woman in a wool hat, stopped me in the aisle. "Your pastries feel like a letter someone took the time to write," she said. "I can taste the care. That stuck with me. I don't need billboards. I don't need anyone to clap the loudest. I just need the people who walk into Kindred to feel like they've come somewhere honest. Somewhere warm. Somewhere that doesn't ask them to be anything but themselves. Just like I finally let myself be." And that's the story of how I lost my family's bakery, and baked my way into something better.